Please pray with me. Lord, bless the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Here we are, already at Labor Day weekend. It feels like the summer has been especially short this year. But here we are, getting ready to celebrate Labor Day tomorrow, the federal holiday that honors our American labor movement and the workers who've contributed their labor to the resilience, the prosperity, the well-being of our country. And this weekend also traditionally is the last weekend of summer, the last chance to jump in an ocean or climb a mountain or drink a gin and tonic on the porch before the nip of fall air brings all of us back inside. But as often has proven to be the case in 2020, this year's Labor Day weekend also holds complexity and more sober experiences. We're still wearing masks on the beach or when we climb those mountains. People are still getting sick. Americans are losing their jobs, and schools that had hoped to be open this September are having to move back to online learning. We're still living in a hard time. In this morning's epistle to the Romans, the Apostle Paul reminds us where to ground ourselves for the challenges we face. He writes, "Owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves one another has fulfilled the law. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor." Leave it to that gruff, determined, clear-eyed Apostle Paul to put it so plainly. He cuts to the heart of what's required of us. He tells us the only exchanges worth anything right now are exchanges of love. The only transactions worth paying any attention to right now are all about love. All the fear and anxiety and worry that is swirling around in the world will only be tamped down by the love we manifest. And this love isn't necessarily the Hallmark card kind of love, that sweet, undemanding love of Valentine's Day cards or birthday cards. Love has many faces in life, and love will manifest itself in many ways as we continue to live under this pandemic. We might find ourselves offering tough love to our children, an anxious kind of love towards an elderly relative or neighbor. We might find ourselves in a lonely love as we walk hospital corridors or staff grocery shelves late at night. We might discover a righteous love as we engage the unemployment or the food insecurity or the political complexity of our time. But all of these expressions of love are love. Ground yourself in love, says St. Paul, and you will be equipped for whatever is required of you. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Love your neighbors as yourself. Paul's advice this morning also reminds me of a gruff, determined, and clear-eyed ancestor of mine, my great-grandfather Franklin, who was a medical doctor during the 1918 flu pandemic. As we all know, that 1918-1920 pandemic was a terrible time in America. And in Syracuse, New York, where my family lived at the time, it was devastating. There were so many sick people in the fall of 1918 that the enormous fairgrounds in Syracuse were turned into an outdoor field hospital with tent after tent, hundreds of them, with bed after bed inside of them. Doctors and nurses went from tent to tent, doing what they could. My great-grandfather came home one night after the first week of serving the newly erected field hospital and said to my great-grandmother, "A third of those patients will die no matter what I do, and a third of them will live without my help. But the last third, I can help save them." And he did. He went out every day serving in that field hospital until the tents were no longer required. He gave his patients gruff, determined, and resigned love. What he did was not easy or enjoyable, but it was based in love. A little over 100 years later, in 2020, what we are doing right now, in whatever profession or situation we find ourselves in, is often not easy or enjoyable, but it is essential that we do it. If we are essential workers, it is essential that we show up. And if we are part of the larger group who are told to stay home, we need to do that as much as we can. And all of us, as we know well by now, need to be masked and socially distanced while we do whatever it is that we do. This year, a clever American reporter said, "We are finished with this pandemic, but the pandemic isn't finished with us." So we continue on. We labor on in a challenging time. We need to adjust our perspective and double down on love accordingly. And so many of us and so many other Americans are doing just that. Here we are engaging, working, caring for one another, our families, and the strangers who need support as best we can. We're forging new disciplines out of the love we have for family and community, stranger, and our country. There can be real satisfaction and a sober kind of joy in that fact, even if it isn't as much fun as romping on a beach or climbing a mountain unencumbered, without a mask or the social distancing that is currently required. We're building up our own resilience, our own capacity for courage. We're deepening our own capacity for loving the other. When we hold fast in times like these, we are deepening our own capacity for love. We're living into Paul's words in Romans this morning. "Owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor." Amen.